type thing.
which is a dumpling or meatball.
It's usually, it's something that's bulgur based. We talked about bulgur, we were just talking about bulgur. Bulgur is a whole grain, a wheat. You see it coarse in pilafs, and then they also grind it. They grind it 3 or 4 different ways. You can get many different textures of bulgur. This is a sort of fine bulgur. It should be a little bit finer for kibbe. You can find it finer. It's almost like flour. What we do is we're going to make a base. There's probably 250 different types of kibbe or kufta. I'm going to use the word kibbe today just because I think that's what you have in your recipe, so I don't confuse you. Some are meat-based and some are vegetable-based. We're going to do a vegetable-based one. This is not a traditional dish, but you will see, we'll talk about the variations as I go. But essentially what we're doing is we're binding our dumpling or fritter, whatever it's going to be, with bulgur instead of flour. So the best example I can think of is if you are making a meatball, you bind it with egg and you bind it with a little flour or breadcrumb, something like that, right? Well, in Eastern Mediterranean, they will use fine wheat, fine ground bulgur to bind it instead of the flour and egg. And this sounds like it's going to be heavy, but the bulgur is actually very, very light. And you're doing 2 things. You're making it lighter, and you're also making it healthier. So there's an art to kibbe. When I say there's 250 at least, you're essentially going to make a dough or a dumpling base for this. You can do many things. You can roll it really thinly out like a pizza and cut it into raviolis. You can bake it, steam it, deep fry it, eat it raw, boil it, you name it. You can do any type of kibbe. But I'm going to show you sort of a basic vegetable kibbe, and then I'm going to present it sort of the way that I think is really interesting. But I'll talk about other variations on it. You can do any type of, this time of year in New England you have lots of squash. So we're using pumpkin. I love Long Island cheese pumpkin, all the red curry, all the Arabic squashes that are out there. You can use butternut squash, you can use sweet potato. There's all sorts of parsnip. You can do all sorts of different variations on this. But the idea is that we're going to make this puree of vegetables. We're going to thicken it with the fine bulgur as if it was flour.
Also, do you know that there's 4 different types of bulgur? There's number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4.
Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. This is not quite as fine as it should be. Yeah. So, sorry, what I've got here is butternut squash puree. Can you guys hear me if I don't pull the microphone close? Okay. So this is the butternut squash. This is pumpkin. I'm doing 2 different things. I'm confusing myself and you now. This is the pumpkin for the pumpkin hummus. This is butternut squash puree for the kibbe. Okay. So the butternut squash has just been pureed just like this in the pan. In another pan, I've got minced onions, green bell pepper, and I've just sauteed them lightly in some olive oil until they start to sweat and get soft. Then I'm going to add my spices to it. I use a little bit of what we call Syrian spice. It's like a combination of cinnamon, allspice, black pepper. It's like the Chinese five spice or the French quatre épices, same kind of thing, but this is doesn't have the Szechuan, doesn't have the star anise, it's more of a basic. So it's some aromatic spice. I'm going to use the red pepper paste.
What other, you said cinnamon, allspice, pepper, what would the other 2 be?
There's a little bit of cinnamon, allspice, black pepper, and nutmeg. That's it.
That's 4.
This is the red pepper paste that we talked about earlier. That's like Murad said, it's a sweet. This one is a sweet one. They do sweet and hot, but they essentially it's the same idea as tomato paste, but the sweet and hot peppers are dried out in the sun, and you get a concentrated. This gives body. This gives richness, depth to a dish. not, you can get this spicy, so if you want more heat, you use it. But if you don't want this spicy, we're just going to use this for a little bit of body, a little bit of color. It will help color the kidney. I'm going to just saute this. And if anybody wants to smell this, you'll get a great smell out of that one. So we've got spices and onions. We're just going to cook that, add it to the butternut squash. A little bit of chilies. I like Murat's chilies better than mine, so I'm going to use a little bit of these. A little bit of heat. And then I'm going to stir it right into the butternut squash puree. You can do this. Another great thing to do is use red lentils and cook as if you're making red lentil soup. And then you bind it with this bulgur. You'll see that it turns into a dough almost. It's a little coarse.
No, you're fine.
I don't know if you guys can see this, but what I'm doing is starting to thicken it now. I'm making a dough. That's what I'm making. So I'm going to let that absorb the bulgur a little for just a minute. You can see how good I am at following recipes. I'm sorry. Measure once. Anyhow, we'll eyeball that. We're going to let it swell. We're going to make a dough, and you'll see as it sits, it gets thicker and thicker, and we're going to be able to shape it. What we're going to do is put it inside these demi-tasse cups and make a big mold as if we're stuffing an arancini or a rice ball or something. We're going to stuff it with feta butter, close it up, bake them, turn them out. So these are almost baked or steamed almost. So you turn it out, and then you cut it open, and you've got a really soft feta center. And you can stuff it with all sorts of things if you want to use things like Swiss chard and raisins, make it a little bit more on the vegetable side. You can do that. Just going to make it a little bit thicker, and then let it rest. So you guys can see that okay, now you've got something that's starting to be very thick as if it's going to hold its shape if you were to squeeze it. It's obviously very hot. We're not going to do that. So this is the kind of consistency that I'm going to rest it at. And then what I like to do with some of these squashes and pumpkin is add just a tiny bit of brown butter. To me, this is squash and pumpkin have that sort of, you know, sometimes they need a little help. They need a little honey, they need a little brown butter to kind of pick up their sweet nuttiness.
Did you ever add flour?
Never. No, ever. Unless I was deep frying it. If I was deep frying it, I might roll it in flour. And I'll show you how we can do that too. You can roll them, you can stuff them with the feta, roll them, and then deep fry it as well. But never stir in flour. This is all about the bulgur letting it do its thing. Right now what's happening is the bulgur is swelling and swelling and swelling. As it swells, it starts to thicken up, and it's going to look just like a dough.
I sometimes use a little starch when I'm shaping it so it won't crack.
A little cornstarch?
Cornstarch or wheat starch.
Oh, like when you're doing the meat ones?
When I'm doing the wheat ones or vegetable ones. I don't do it this way.
This would be red lentils, sweet potatoes, but we're going to let the bulgur I can still see is al dente because it's not quite as fine as it should be. You can get really, really finely ground bulgur. Now the thing you can't do is grind it. If you have coarse bulgur, you cannot grind it. You need to mill it. So you need to make sure when you're making kibbe must be made with fine bulgur, finely ground bulgur. So a little more salt. We're going to let this sit. We'll come back to this.